Good afternoon and welcome to our last Hawkeye Parent and Family webinars of the 2015-2016 academic year. Once again, my name is Danielle Martinez and I work in academic support and retention and will be the moderator for today's webinar. As our academic year winds down and students get ready for the summer, we know that a new transition will occur. So today's webinar is Homeward Bound, Managing the Summer Transition and Getting to the Next Year, hosted by Academic Support and Retention and University Counseling Service. We are really fortunate today to have Dr. Paula Keaton as our presenter. Paula serves as the Director of Clinical Services at University Counseling Service, and as a licensed psychologist, Paula is committed to social justice and leadership, and some of her specialty areas include relationship and family concerns, self-esteem concerns. And some of you may remember her from her amazing session during summer orientation entitled Letting Go, or our previous Hawkeye Parent and Family webinar about handling homesickness. As a reminder, each webinar is recorded and then posted on the Academic Support and Retention website so it can be accessed at a later date or viewed by individuals who are not able to attend the live webinar. Therefore, during the presentation, your mic functions will be muted. Later, we'll have a question and answer portion where you can type a question into the box on the side, and we will make sure that we can try to answer your question as best as possible. So, without further ado, Dr. Paula Keaton.
Thank you, Danielle. You should probably say your name right. And I want to say congratulations to all the parents and caregivers out there, because we are just an eyelash away from having this academic year complete. And hopefully we can say, yay, your students made it. And you know what? You did too. So both groups are going to be going through a transition here soon, both your students as well as you. Many of your students are going to be moving home for the summer. And I'm hopeful that you all will have a peaceful summer. But I think there's going to need to be a little bit of effort put into how you all want to manage things. Because not only have your sons and daughters and students that you care for, not only have they grown and changed, but you've grown and changed too. Time does not simply stand still. So we're going to be talking about some of those things you can anticipate from your students, as well as some things you can do to help your home environment be even better than you expected. As Danielle said, some of you may remember me from the Letting Go talk at summer orientation. You're going to hear a few themes that I kind of really lean into during that talk as well. So, you know, again, there's nothing like communication. You'll hear me say it again and again. We do have a few goals. Oops, this is not forwarding. All right, so we do have a few goals today. And the first one is, I hope that you will be able to gain a broader understanding of what your students might be worrying about as they anticipate moving home. It's going to be a big change for them, just like it's going to be a big change for you. I hope that you will be able to walk away from this understanding the impact that moving home may have on you and your students. And importantly, I hope that you can identify some strategies to make the transition smoother and healthier than, again, you could have even imagined. And lastly, you're going to have the opportunity to learn about resources on campus, particularly University Counseling Service. So, bottom line, transitions are hard. And why are they hard? Well, they require us to shift our focus and shift our attention. And we humans, we don't like to do that so much. We like our routine. We like to be able to predict how things are going to work. With your son or daughter having been gone for 9 months, you've kind of gotten into a new routine. And their return to the home environment is going to create yet another change. These changes can be quite overwhelming. As you think about your students coming home, we have to recognize that both you and your students likely have very different expectations of how things are going to go this summer. Sometimes those expectations are going to be opposite of one another. You might be really excited to spend more time with them, and they might be really excited to spend more time with their friends that they've made back, that they have retained from back home. So it's going to require some compromise. It's also going to change everybody's schedules. You all have had ways of doing things when they were still in high school. So you kind of had a normal, typical way of interacting with one another. Well, with this transition, I think it's time to set some new norms, and we're going to be talking about that. Your relationship with your son or daughter may have gotten better, or it unfortunately may not have gotten better. So having that student back in your household is going to create yet another transition. But as I said, nothing happens in a vacuum. You've grown and changed. Your son or daughter has grown or changed. And maybe you all have had some struggles. Maybe you haven't. But their entry back into the home environment is going to create a significant transition. So let's talk a little bit about what your students might be fretting about as they anticipate moving back home in less than a week. Yes, folks, it's less than a week when they will be back in your house. And you might be fretting about a few things, worrying about a few things, but so are they. And these things that I'm going to share with you are things that students have actually told me. So what are they worrying about as they think about coming home? They're really worried about whether or not you all are going to try to reestablish the old rules, that they're worried that they're going to be treated as if they were still maybe 16 years old. It's actually going to be a culture shock for them. They're also worried about feeling judged. They've been dressing the way they want. They've been sleeping when they want. They've been speaking the way they want. And some of those things might not fly so well in the house, and they might feel judged for it. So they're worrying about that. They're also worried about their sense of freedom and independence. They've not had to ask anyone about permission to go anywhere. They've not had to ask permission about staying up late or coming in late. They don't have to ask permission for who they're going to spend their time with or where they're going to spend their time with someone. They may have had people in their room, in their residence hall, day and night, but they've not had to ask anyone's permission for that. They're afraid that it's going to be an endless list of asking of permission of you for them to at least have part of their life continue as it was at college. They're also worried about loneliness. They've made most of them, hopefully, have made really good friends here. And most of those friends are not from their hometown. So they're worried about that sense of emptiness and the people that they've had deep connections with over the last 9 months. They're not going to be able to see them very much. Hopefully they're going to stay connected, but they're really worried about that. And they're also worried about getting bored. College life is a lot of activity. And depending on how your family works, depending on the community you live in, it may not be as stimulating. And boredom is a real risk. So I do have some ideas about how to turn these things around, but they're worried about being bored. And they're really worried about feeling smothered by you. Yes, by you. You've probably missed them, and in their ways, they've missed you too. And you may want to have every living moment with them this summer. And I honestly can't think of many circumstances where that's going to go very well for any of you. So they're worried that they're going to be controlled or smothered by you. And there are a whole bunch of other things that they fret about as well. I have a quick list I'm just going to go over with you. They're afraid that you're going to treat them like a child instead of the emerging adult they are. They're afraid that you're just going to keep telling them what to do as you had when they were younger. They're afraid you're going to keep trying to get into their business. They're afraid they can't really be themselves anymore. They're afraid that all the expectations are going to be the same, that they're going to have to fit back into some role that they feel like they've outgrown. They're worried about being able to fairly split their time between family and friends and even spending some time with themselves. They're worried about all the old ways that you all drive each other nuts. They've kind of been relieved to be away from that some, and they might miss some of it, but they are kind of afraid that they're going to be provoked to kind of react in immature ways. in your family there may be some conflict, or there might be some problems, and they're really afraid of stepping back into that. And that's, for many students, that's really making them anxious. And for some families that are families of divorce or split in some way, they're worried about how they're going to split their time between all of those families. And in general, they just don't know how it's going to be anymore. It's new to them, it's new to you, and I don't think we can pretend it's just going to be just like it always was. So what do I tell these students? I do have some advice. And the first one is, of course, it's going to be about communication. I want those students to be talking with you about the coming home process, talking about what those expectations are. A little bit later in this presentation, I'm going to be offering you some specific steps so that you can initiate this process as well. There is a need to talk about family expectations, to talk about how they feel about themselves in their new adult roles. I'm advising them to plan their time, that living back within a family system, there are going to be some obligations that they have to meet, but they also maybe have some personal obligations to meet. And that might be work, that might be helping around the house, that might be other relationships, but they really need to spend some time figuring out how they're going to divide their time. They do need to build in some time to relax as well. I'm encouraging them to be creative and change the way they deal with problems. That sometimes a parent feels pressed to kind of be a little more directive to their kids because their kids are demonstrating that they're not handling their problems in mature ways. So I'm encouraging these students to really figure out how to take an adult position on how they're going to deal with their problems. I'm encouraging them to communicate more effectively with their family. That it's not okay if they're feeling frustrated about one thing to take it out on you as a parent. I just don't think that's fair to you. I don't think it's fair to them either because they don't really get to solve their own problems. So I'm asking them to share information with you, to express their feelings appropriately, to establish with you what the limitations are and how to, kind of keep to those agreements. I'm encouraging them to stay calm and to listen before they react. In other words, to think before they speak. I'm asking them to be aware of their voice, their tone of voice, and their body posture. And I'm encouraging them to use I statements. In other words, to demonstrate how something is impacting them. For example, to say, I'm feeling really stressed out by the list of 9 chores you gave me to finish by noon today, so that you all have room to negotiate. I'm also encouraging them to take time to process or share their experiences with someone. That, if they're having a hard time with the transition, maybe you are the right person for them to talk about, but maybe not. Maybe they need to reach out to a supportive aunt or a supportive uncle or a neighbor, just to really talk about the transition in a way that's not going to hurt anybody's feeling. Maybe they need to talk to a counselor. Maybe they've been in counseling this year. So I want to encourage you all to be open to how they may need to process their experiences. So, are you ready for them to be home? Again, you might be having some mixed feelings about this. Some of you are super excited. Some of you might be experiencing a little bit of what, dare I say, dread. Because things are going to change. In my letting go talk, I always talk about how the relationship is not over. It is changing as your student comes to college. Well, as they re-enter your household, again, the relationship's not over, but it's definitely going to change. Prior to your son or daughter returning from home, I want you to take some time to sit down and make a list of things that might be an issue when your son or daughter returns. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, but I do want you to take some time to look at it. And recognize that what your wants and needs are may not, clearly match up with what your son or daughter's needs or expectations are. to begin with, I would want you to be talking to your students about how long of a window your kid gets to decompress. You'll see from a later slide, I think those first few days home, like just let them sleep, let them get caught up and appreciate the good meals you're going to make for them. And maybe on that day 1, 2, that you're not handing them a big list of chores. Maybe you all just get to lay low for those first few days, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I want to remind you that 18 or 20-year-olds sometimes go through a period of distancing and what I call individuation, so becoming an individual. They need to do that in order to find their adulthood away from you. Many of them have been doing it all year. Many of them are really going to start engaging in it this summer. This is all with the goal of being able to reconnect with you on more even terms. Those even terms will begin this summer. They're not going to be perfect and they're not going to be complete, but it is the starting point. They really need to figure out how they fit in this family now that they've been out of it for the last 9 months. When your kid last lived with you, it was likely under these old high school type rules, but he or she have now been on their own for a year, and I think they're going to expect to be able to operate in a more independent manner. Maybe not to the extremes that they did at college, but I think it's going to have to look way different than it did when they were in high school. The other thing is you've grown accustomed to probably not monitoring this kid as in the way that you did in high school. I'm going to recommend that you continue to be a little lighter on the monitoring than you were maybe at this time last year. So it really is time to start thinking about how you're going to make your living arrangements this summer more livable and even pleasurable. So I want you to consider these 5 questions to ask yourself when you think about parenting your young adult. I know it might be hard to look at this individual as a young adult when in your mind you still see them as that 1.5-year-old who are taking steps and learning to run and saying their words. But many years obviously have passed. So this is a different breed of parenting. So I want you to ask yourself, are my parenting strategies moving toward independence for my kid? Are my parenting strategies balancing freedom and responsibility? Are my parenting strategies motivated primarily by love, or is it by fear? Are my parenting strategies providing guidance without enabling? And are my parenting strategies part of an ongoing dialogue? I would hope that you're able to answer these questions with a yes. And if you can't answer these questions with a yes, this really kind of marks where you get to grow in your parenting approach. I know that might feel like quite a challenge, but I honestly believe that you're up for that. So let's talk about those first few days home. First off, and your students love me for this, but it is, let them sleep. They're coming off of finals week. Many of them are pretty sleep deprived. They've not been eating all that well. They've been going through emotional things all over the place. They're having to say goodbye to friends, and sometimes folks just need to sleep. Let them sleep without judgment if possible. It doesn't necessarily mean they're lazy if for a few days they sleep for 12 straight hours. I'm going to encourage you to have some good food, some of their favorite foods around the house. This might be the opportunity for you to help them get back onto a regular, kind of more standard eating routine, maybe less processed foods. But again, I think there's room for some treats and for some things that will make them feel at home. And again, I'm going to encourage you to give them some space. That when they get home, they're not going to spend 24/7 with you. They need some time to themselves. They need some time with their friends. I know you've missed them, but hopefully y'all are going to be able to talk about how much time are we going to spend together? When are we going to spend time together? Maybe you create a new family routine that's expected on Monday evenings. You all have dinner together. Like that, maybe that's a non-negotiable in that case. In terms of the giving them space too, I want you to, again, give them room and not get all of your questions out for them about how their year went in a single day. You can space it out a little bit. I think it would be overwhelming for both of you to have endless questions for them. I'm going to ask you to spoil them a little bit too. You know, that doesn't mean that you have to do everything in the world for them, but maybe for this first week you do their laundry. I'm a big fan of people doing their own laundry, but maybe for this week you do it for them. But they also need to recognize they have responsibilities to play out through the summer. They're quite capable of, they've proven that they're capable of taking care of themselves. But again, for these first few days, I think you get to mother or father without smothering. And lastly, when the time is right, I'm going to encourage you to hug them, and hug them a lot. You know, they've been away from you. They've likely missed you. You've missed them. And it's important to not only reconnect emotionally, but also physically. So what are some of the big things that are going to be going on in those first few days? I think that it is the time to be doing some renegotiations around a number of topics. And remember, it's not just your kid that needs to do the compromising. I think if you come up with a list of demands that your son or daughter must obey, I can promise you you're going to be sadly disappointed. But if there's an opportunity for you all to come up with a list together, I think it increases the opportunity for things to go more smoothly. You know, I mentioned earlier about writing down everything you think that might become a problem or annoyance. And for you and your list, this is your private list. Don't ignore the little things. Like it might be, you know, you really value having milk in the jug when you grab it out of the refrigerator. You know, you've not had to worry about that because your son's been gone the whole time and you can actually count on milk being in the jug. So just get all those things out of your head and written down. I'm going to ask you to ask your kid to do the same thing. So again, this is a list of problems or annoyances that may come up for you. Once everybody's kind of together again, I think it is an opportunity to sit down and start talking about these things. You know, there are going to be some things on your list that you're not going to say out loud, and that's fine. Just like for your student, they're not going to say everything out loud. But we want to bring the whole family in on this discussion about what are some of the key points that we really need to be focusing on. You know, again, don't get caught up in a list of demands. Believe it or not, your kids are now firmly into their young adulthood, and they've become kind of accustomed to being treated as a young adult. So this is your opportunity for you to take a healthy look at who they've become. I mean, these are the kids you raised, and I hope that you're taking pride in that. They're not your baby anymore, even though that breaks your heart a little bit. This is an opportunity for adults to get together and to sort out how we're going to live peacefully together. Some things that I think are important to be talking about, I kind of put into these little splashes of color on this page. You know, housework, cleanliness of the house, who has chores, what are the expectations around those chores, remembering that your way is not always the only way. Who's going to be doing what? How are they going to be a productive member of this household? I think you get to discuss the division of labor. I think it's super important that you don't become their housekeeper, that you don't become their laundress per se, but rather getting clear at this point. Who's responsible for what? What's their own responsibility? What is the family responsibility? You know, they've been taking care of their living environment to varying degrees for the past year. And I think that this is a good opportunity for you to help them prepare for next year, because most of your students are going to be living in apartments next year. So there are some definite skills that need to be discussed with them as they prepare for an apartment life. You know, with the household and housework also becomes food. I think that You all get to discuss what you'll buy for the family as whole, and if they have special or expensive treats that they've become accustomed to, well, that's their opportunity to provide for themselves. Curfew is a really, really important thing to talk about up front. Most of my encounters with your students is that they don't want a curfew. And some of the literature even supports that a curfew is going to just be something to break as opposed to abide by. But be talking about general expectations. Maybe you all come to an agreement about it is important for you to know where he or she is at and generally what time you can expect them home. But whatever is going to work for your family and can be agreed upon, I think is really important. Another topic that often isn't talked about is alcohol and other substance abuse. I think it's fair to say that you can be absolutely uncompromising on the topic of drinking and driving. That's a no-go in any family that I know. But again, this is a chance to revisit a conversation about what your shared values are and about what the reality is regarding alcohol. Many of your sons and daughters have been drinking, especially alcohol, during the school year. And some of them have done so in a really unchecked way. I want you all to be able to engage in a conversation about what those expectations are around alcohol in your house. If he or she goes to parties, again, it's important to get that out there. Appearance is a really interesting topic too. They've been dressing the way they want. Maybe they've dyed their hair a different color, gotten a haircut that you might think is weird. Maybe they've gotten pierced. Maybe they've gotten tattooed. Maybe they're wearing clothes that you don't approve of. Well, I think that this is a topic of discussion. For the most part, I think it would be important not to dictate what they're wearing, but rather to discuss what the expectations are for appearance when it's just the family at home or if company comes over. And again, that they're part of this family system. Sleep. Sleep is always a big, big topic for summer. I can even remember it for myself way back when I came home for the first time. For some young adults, getting a lot of sleep is not laziness, and it's not just a preference. In some ways, it's an absolute necessity. We know that folks in their late teens need more sleep than pretty much any other age group. So they might sleep a lot. I think as long as they're meeting their obligations, both within the family and if they have a job they need to get to, I think maybe it's a good idea to just let them sleep, which I know might be hard to hear. I encourage you not to function as their alarm clock, though. If they have obligations, they need to meet them. They've been getting themselves up and getting to class all year. They can continue to do so this summer. And lastly, money and working. How is money managed in your house? Some families, when their young adult student moves back home, they might charge them a small token amount of rent, or they may ask them to pay for certain things that maybe they didn't pay for. I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just saying that different families do it different ways. I personally think it's a good idea for a student to have at least some work during the summer so that they have their money and that they don't have to ask for an allowance. Asking for an allowance really pushes them back into a more immature role. And I think all of our goals are to help them to work towards their maturity. And again, I don't think that this is an exhaustive list. I think that the list will be different for every family. But whatever you all agree on, I recommend that you write it down and honestly have both you and your student sign it. Now, I think it's lovely to have these plans, but we know that plans don't always play out the way we anticipate. So once you all sit down and talk about what the expectations are, I think you have to plan in, let's say, a week or 10 days to sit back down and look at the list and say, how are we doing? What do we need to take off? What do we need to change? And what do we need to add? So I love this quote. The two words of information and communication are often used interchangeably, but they signify quite different things. Information is giving out, whereas communication is getting through. So I think it's important that you all really engage in healthy communication. It's not just information sharing. It really is coming to an understanding of where each person is coming from and finding compromised positions. If you do need to give your student direct feedback, I ask that you be clear and that you be succinct about it. It might be, please don't use the end of the toilet paper and not replace the roll. An extra roll is under the sink. Replace it now, please. As opposed to engaging in some kind of indirect communication that ends up in an argument, and then before you know it, it's no longer about toilet paper. It's about when she failed to lock up her bike and the bike got stolen when she was 10 years old. These kind of arguments kind of morph into other topics. So I just ask that you give feedback in a really clear and succinct manner. I'm going to ask you to practice reflective parenting rather than reactive parenting. Reflective parenting means that you all are talking about things on an ongoing basis, finding out where each other is on a certain topic, as opposed to reactions. And when we react to things, we often say things we wish we could take back. Again, all of this really revolves around healthy communication. Really allowing yourself to have empathy for your son or daughter, to actively listen, to not start giving the answer before they've finished a question. So to take turns in communication, to really hear one another and to clarify what you're hearing. And I ask that these communications be as judgment-free as possible. So again, your son or daughter is coming home before you know it. And I'm hopeful that it will be a good experience for you all this summer, but I do think it's important that you get your communication going, that you get your goals aligned with one another. You know, some people struggle with these things, and sometimes it requires an outside person to help them with their communication skills or to understand their stresses. So obviously I'm a psychologist. I think that counseling is a good thing. One of the things we're able to do here on campus is that University Counseling Service. So just to give the real quick plug for our services is that, we offer consultations, we offer group counseling, individual counseling, we offer case management services. Our services are free and confidential to any enrolled student. We see somewhere around 2,000 students per year for a wide range of concerns. We have a growing professional staff of psychologists, social workers, and doctoral trainees. And we're happy to consult with you and about your concerns for your students. However, your students must, if you want your student to come to counseling, please know that they're the ones who must make their appointments. We're located on the west side of the river in the West Lawn building near Student Health and Wellness. We're really easy to access. And we do have a web page that you can visit. So at this point, I want to kind of send it over to Danielle to see if we have any questions.
So thanks so much, Paula, for all the great information about the transition home and laundry and food and money and curfew. It's all great information. So just a reminder, we have some different folks on the webinar, so we are unable to answer specific things about your student's experience, but able to answer more general questions that might be helpful in guiding your student and family. So if you have a question, please type it into the question box, and then we'll go ahead and read the question out loud so everybody on the webinar can understand sort of where we're coming from, and then Paul will answer. If you're unable to get your question answered during the webinar, we'll follow up with you via email to make sure that we have answered your question. So we'll go ahead and get started. And it looks like we already have our first question. So this person has someone who is finishing their first year and thinking about that this might be the last summer together based on previous plans, whether it's summer school or study abroad. And so How do you create a parent strategy focused on love and support instead of fear of the student growing up too fast?
Well, what I'm really struck by here is that those last two words, too fast. I think these kind of transition, as I said earlier, it's tough for both parties, but it's tough in different ways. Remember, your son or daughter growing up and becoming independent, that has been the goal for 18 or 19 years. So part of this is maybe you figuring out how to soothe yourself that you've done an excellent job. And I think that you get to talk with in this case, I think the example, with your daughter about what your concerns might be. It's not unusual for this summer to be the last full summer that a student is going to be home. In this day and age, so many students take summer classes, or so many folks are having work experiences that are away from the home environment. I guess I just want to assure you that this is really pretty darn normal. And I know it might be hard on you, and that might be where you need to get your own support with parents who've gone through the same thing, or other people who are influential in your life. I think that even your statement of focused on love and support, that really indicates to me that you have such good intentions in allowing your daughter to grow up and to be a strong, independent woman. So part of it is letting her do so. And again, I don't know that it's too fast.
All right, so we have another question if there are services available over the summer, people available via the counseling website to email or talk over the phone.
So as an agency, we're open all year round. We only close when the university closes, which is over the winter holidays and a couple official national holidays.
4th of July.
4th of July, things like that, yeah. So if your student is in the Iowa City area and they've completed their spring semester, they plan to enroll in the fall, they would still be eligible for one-on-one or group counseling services with us, but we are unable to deliver services via a website or email or to talk over the phone. Those kind of electronic therapy modes, we're not set up to do that in a way that would honor confidentiality, especially if someone is outside of the state. For example, my license as a psychologist is only good for the state of Iowa. And if you're in Illinois, I cannot deliver services in Illinois. And if that's where you are, that would be explicitly prohibited by my license.
Good question. What about a dating or romantic life? So a student has a partner. How do parents and family members support that?
Well, that can be a challenge because you may approve or disapprove of said partner. But part of this is reminding yourself where you were at when you were 19 years old in terms of your relationships. That I think that helping your students balance both their individual identity as well as their identity in a relationship, to balance those two things, I think is important for all of us. But we also know that early in relationships, especially at this age, sometimes people just have blinders on and they have to work through that on their own. I want us all to remember what it was like the first time you fell in love. No one could talk sense into us. And it just really doesn't happen at this age anymore. So again, I think it is talking about it and being able to help your student have multiple identities, both as a family member, as a partner, and as your son or daughter.
So how long after the student is home do you recommend to have that discussion with them that you were talking about?
I would initiate the process pretty early on. I would even right now give your student a heads up that you're going to sit down and have this conversation, and that even now you can ask them to generate their list about what's kind of stressing them out or what they're worried about, and that you can be doing the same too. I don't think there's any magic number, but I would say give them 2 or 3 days just to I guess, for lack of a better word, chill a little bit. But I would say even before they get home, have a planned day and when you're going to sit down and talk about it. And it might be saying now, if they come home next weekend, you might say, Wednesday evening, let's sit down and talk about this. Don't put anything else on your schedule. I'll buy you a pizza. Let's talk.
So how should a parent discuss first year grades if they're lower than expected? For example, like a B average.
Well, I want to remind you that a B average is a good grade.
Yes.
That, we want to be realistic about what success means academically. And I know some of your students have high aspirations for graduate school and professional schools and that they need, a B plus average or an A average. But I want us to remember that this first year of college can be a really, really significant challenge for folks. Learning how to, I'm using air quotes, do college is way different than how they did high school. I think it's fair to talk about the grades and not in a super judgmental way, but rather to ask questions, to get curious. Like, honey, help me understand why you got a C in this class, but in this class you got an A. I think you're going to learn a lot about what they're passionate about and maybe what they're not passionate about. But again, to approach the situation and the conversation in a non-punishing and non-judgmental way. And also, I think you get to have the conversation about how are we going to strategize, how can I help you strategize about becoming a better student? Let's say that they have a C average instead of a B average. I'm a big fan of a B average in that first year.
So this parent is concerned that their child didn't make many friends at Iowa, and so maybe placing sort of unrealistic expectations of high school friends that they'll regroup over the summer and sort of maybe relive the glory days. So, some of them have already showed up over other breaks and already sort of given signs about moving on. So what should this person say when his son tries to reach out to his old friends and they simply ignore him?
Oh, that kind of breaks my heart a little bit. I would hope that those friendships have some kind of sustaining power, and it might be different when they have the whole summer as opposed to a few weeks over the winter break. But I think part of this growing up process is really helping folks enhance and learn their social skills. If this is something that your son or daughter is genuinely struggling with and want to improve, I think using the summer to engage in some activities maybe they've never engaged in before. That might mean volunteering somewhere, or it might be going into counseling to talk about social anxiety and how to make and maintain friendships. I think if it's skill-based, I think there are a lot of ways to learn how to make connections. Or if it's just kind of exposure, like, needing to make new friends and new relationships, I think there are a lot of venues to do that. And that might be through sports. Again, it might be through volunteering. It might be through them getting a job and being able to hang out with like-minded people.
So we have someone who says that they just want to thank you to acknowledge that the transition doesn't only happen for their child, but for them too. And looks like we might have another question. Is a student advisor available during the summer?
I know that the academic advising office, I know that they're open all summer. If we're talking about an advisor in a specific department, that's hard to say. Many faculty are on a 9-month contract where they're not easily accessible in the summertime. They're usually accessible via email. But with the Academic Advising Center on campus, they're absolutely here and open. Sometimes they're going to be a little hard to reach because we have so many new student orientations going on, and when those orientations are going on, they are standing alert and ready and helping all of those new students get registered, just like they helped your son and daughter get registered last summer.
Well, that looks like that is all the questions that we have. Thank you so much to Dr. Paula Keaton for joining us today and all the great information about sort of managing the summer transition. Just as a reminder, all webinars will be posted online on our website, uc-uiowa.edu/family resources. If you're unable to get a question answered, feel free to email us at uc-retention@uiowa.edu for a response from a university staff member. We'll be back in August with more webinars, and thank you so much for joining us this season on Iowa, and go Hawks!